She arrived just after sunrise. No shoes, tangled hair, and a teddy bear pressed tightly to her chest. No one knew who she was or how she found her way to the hospital. All she said was that her father was inside, and she needed to see him one last time. The nurse on duty hesitated until she checked. The file and what she saw made her heart stop. What started as a routine morning turned into a moment that would shake the entire hospital. Behind the girl's quiet voice was a truth no one was prepared to face. This is another heartfelt story from Mr. Edwards' Tales, where you feel the real emotion of stories that make you reflect on life. Let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It was just after 6:45 a.m. when Laura Mendez stepped out of the staff locker room and adjusted the white badge on her uniform, her name printed in bold above the title, Head Nurse. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly in the hospital corridor as the morning staff began their rounds. Laura was halfway through checking the ICU's handover notes when the soft creak of the main doors caught her attention. She looked up, expecting to see a late intern or perhaps an anxious relative, but instead saw something that made her heart stop. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, standing alone in the center of the reception area. Her dress was too thin for the bitter February cold, its hem frayed and caked with dirt. Her shoes were mismatched, and her pale hands clutched a well-worn teddy bear so tightly it seemed like it was holding her together. Her hair was tangled, the kind of knots that spoke not of a skipped morning but of weeks without proper care. Laura instinctively stepped forward, her voice calm, yet authoritative. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Are you here with someone?" The girl didn't answer. She only looked up with wide, pleading eyes and whispered, "I need to see my daddy." "His name is Thomas Blake." Laura blinked hard, her professional instincts immediately sharpening. Thomas Blake, she knew that name well. He had been admitted 3 days ago after collapsing in his office. He was now in the ICU, unconscious and in critical condition. But his file was clear. No listed dependents, no children, only a spouse, Dana Blake, who had not yet visited once since his admission. "Are you sure?" Laura asked gently, crouching down so she could meet the girl's gaze. "Thomas Blake? That's your father?" The child nodded slowly. Her lips quivered, but her voice stayed steady. Mommy said if he didn't come back, I should find the hospital and tell the nurse his name. She said the nurse would help. There was no defiance or confusion in the child's tone, only a quiet certainty that came from rehearsing these lines more times than anyone should. Laura hesitated. Her logical brain urged her to call security, to follow protocol. But another part of her, the one shaped by 15 years of seeing humanity in its most fragile forms, told her something wasn't right. She reached out and gently touched the girl's arm. "Okay. What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, then murmured, "My mommy calls me Ellie." The lobby had started to fill with the sounds of mourning. Phones ringing, coffee cups clinking, nurses exchanging shift reports. But around Laura and Ellie, a quiet bubble seemed to form. Laura rose slowly and extended her hand. "Come with me. Let's get you somewhere warm and safe while we sort this out." Ellie clutched her teddy bear tighter and placed her small hand into Laura's. They walked slowly toward the nurse's station. "Do you know where your mother is?" Laura asked, glancing down. "Is she here too?" Ellie shook her head. "She's sick. She couldn't walk anymore. She said Daddy would know what to do, but he didn't come." Her voice cracked on the last word. Laura swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions from showing. She guided the child to a chair near the desk and slipped off her own white coat, wrapping it around Ellie's small shoulders. She turned to the nurse on duty. "Get Dr. Hanley. Tell him it's urgent. And notify social services. We have a child alone with a possible family emergency." Then she turned back to Ellie. "You're safe now, okay? I promise." But even as she said the words, doubt pressed at the edges of her mind. Who was this child really? And why wasn't her name anywhere in the system? 10 minutes later, Dr. Hanley appeared, his expression lined with concern as Laura quickly brought him up to speed. The doctor knelt before Ellie and spoke gently. "Hi there. I'm Dr. Sam. Can I ask you some questions?" Ellie looked at Laura for reassurance, and Laura nodded. "It's okay, sweetheart. He's here to help." Ellie nodded, still holding tight to the bear. "Can you tell me if you have any papers with you? Maybe something with your name or your mom's name?" Sam asked. Ellie frowned and pulled something from the bear's small fabric pouch, a folded scrap of paper. Laura took it and unfolded it carefully. On it was scribbled in uneven handwriting, "If something happens to me, her name is Ellie Grace. Her father is Thomas Blake. Please help her. No address, no contact number. Just that." Laura handed the note to Sam without a word. "We'll keep her here while we notify the proper channels," he said quietly. "But this could get complicated fast. If Thomas Blake really is her father and she's not listed in any of his records, there's going to be a legal mess." Laura nodded. "Let's keep her safe until we know more." As Ellie was escorted to the pediatric ward for a full medical evaluation, Laura returned to her station and opened Thomas Blake's digital file again. There was nothing unusual. A clean medical history, a standard emergency contact listed as his wife Dana, and a profile photo from his ID badge at the investment firm where he worked. He didn't look like a man with secrets. But Laura had seen enough over the years to know that secrets rarely showed up on paper. She scrolled through the admission logs, checking if anyone had visited him since he'd been admitted. There was no record of Dana Blake or anyone. Laura clenched her jaw. Something wasn't adding up. Either the girl was confused or someone was hiding the truth. And the more Laura looked at Ellie's face in her mind, the less she believed it was confusion. She closed the file and picked up the hospital phone. "Get me social services again," she said. "And pull up any personnel history we have on a Rose Grace. Check if she was ever employed here or had any connection to Thomas Blake. I want everything." Meanwhile, in the pediatric observation room, Ellie sat quietly on the examination table, her bare feet dangling, eyes watching the ceiling tiles. A pediatric nurse named Jenna knelt beside her, checking her vitals. "Does anything hurt, sweetie?" Ellie shook her head. "Just tired," she murmured. Jenna smiled kindly and handed her a juice box. "You're very brave. I heard you came here all by yourself." Ellie nodded. "Mom said I had to." Her voice trembled, and she looked toward the doorway as if expecting her mother to appear at any moment. "She didn't want to come because of the lady in the black car," Ellie added softly. Jenna blinked, unsure what to make of that. "What lady?" Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper. "The one who always screamed at Mommy. The one Daddy said not to tell anyone about." Jenna glanced toward the door, then back at Ellie. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. This was something much bigger, something that had been hidden. She stepped outside and immediately flagged down Laura, who had just arrived. "We have a situation. This child may be in serious danger," Jenna said quietly. Laura didn't hesitate. "Then we treat her like any other emergency. We don't leave her side." The pediatric wing of Cedar Hill Memorial was unusually quiet that afternoon, the usual chatter of visiting families muffled by the sterile hush that often settled around cases like Emily's. Laura stood beside Dr. Hanley and the hospital's pediatrician, Dr. Elise Morera, reviewing the initial findings of the child's evaluation. Emily had been given a warm meal, clean clothes, and a soft bed for the first time in what might have been weeks, yet her silence remained unshaken. "She's severely underweight for her age," Elise noted, her voice calm but edged with concern. "There are old bruises on her back and upper arms, faded but consistent with repetitive blunt trauma. Not recent, but certainly inflicted. Her growth percentile is in the lower fifth, and there are indications of prolonged stress, elevated cortisol, sleep disturbances, likely PTSD. Laura exhaled, the knot in her stomach tightening. "We can't just treat her and discharge her. Not with these signs." Elise nodded. "She'll need psychological support, and if what she's saying is true, we may be dealing with more than neglect. This could be a custody issue, or worse, a concealed paternity case." Laura's eyes narrowed. "Then we find the truth, quiet or not." By the time Julia Ramos arrived, Laura had already compiled a brief summary of everything they'd learned so far. Julia, a seasoned social worker with a reputation for balancing compassion and precision, stepped into the consultation room with her notebook tucked under one arm and a box of crayons under the other. "You must be Emily," she said gently, kneeling beside the child. Emily glanced up but didn't speak. Her teddy bear sat on her lap, its seams unraveling. "My name is Julia. I help kids when grown-up things get too confusing or scary. Can I sit with you?" Emily nodded faintly. Julia placed the crayons and a piece of paper on the small table. "I thought maybe you'd like to draw while we talk. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. But anything you tell me stays just between us, unless it's something really important that we need to share to keep you safe." Slowly, Emily picked up a crayon and began sketching a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. "Do you know who lives in this house?" Julia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me and Mommy," Emily said finally, her voice a fragile whisper. "Before the lady made us leave." Laura watched from the other side of the glass window, her arms folded tightly as she tried to make sense of what she was hearing. She had pulled records from the hospital's former employment files and buried in a 2019 folder found a name: Rose Taylor, hired as part-time household staff for a local private residence. Thomas Blake's registered address. Termination reason: none listed. No severance, no forwarding contact. Just vanished. Laura felt the chill creep up her spine. Something had happened then, something no one wanted to document. When Julia finished her first session, she stepped out to join Laura. "This girl's story isn't fiction," Julia said flatly. "The details she's giving me, the names, the way she talks about the lady in the black car, these are not imagined. Her emotional cues, her vocabulary, they're all consistent with real trauma. She's hiding nothing. She says her father is Thomas Blake, and her mother worked in his house until they were thrown out." Laura looked down at the paper Emily had drawn. The smoke was now colored black. The small figure of a woman was lying next to the house. A little girl was walking away from it, dragging a bear. By mid-afternoon, things had already started to shift. Meredith Blake, the legal wife of Thomas Blake, stormed into the administrative offices of Cedar Hill Memorial like a thundercloud. Dressed in a black trench coat and red stilettos, her sunglasses remained firmly in place as she barked orders at the receptionist. "I demand to speak with whoever is in charge of this outrageous circus. My husband is unconscious, and you're allowing some vagrant child to make baseless claims about our family?" Laura was called in to meet her in the director's lounge, accompanied by the hospital's legal advisor. "Mrs. Blake," Laura said carefully, "a young girl arrived here this morning identifying herself as Emily Grace. She claims to be the daughter of Mr. Thomas Blake. We are not making accusations, only following standard child welfare protocols." Meredith's lips curled. "There are no children. My husband and I never had any. This child is a liar, or worse, part of some scam." Laura kept her tone even. "Do you know a woman named Rose Taylor?" Meredith stiffened. "That woman used to work in our household years ago. She was dismissed for misconduct. She left without warning." Laura met her gaze. "Emily says otherwise." As Meredith left in a fury, her stilettos clicking down the hall, Julia returned to the pediatric room with a more delicate question. "Emily, do you remember the last thing your daddy said to you?" The child stopped drawing. For a moment, the air felt as still as a held breath. "He said he was sorry," Emily whispered. "He said he would find a way. He gave me the bear and told me to be brave. Then he didn't come back." Julia reached out and gently touched the girl's hand. "You were very brave to come here. I think he'd be proud of you." Emily nodded, her eyes full of tears she wouldn't let fall. "Mommy said not to use my real name in front of the lady. Said if we ever needed help to go to a nurse and say Daddy's name, that they would help." Julia scribbled notes furiously. She had heard this pattern before. Carefully rehearsed emergency scripts used by parents who knew their children might be in danger. "And your mommy?" Julia asked softly. "Do you know where she is now?" Emily hesitated, then whispered, "She was coughing a lot. She told me to go alone. Said the hospital would know." That night, Laura sat alone in the staff lounge, staring at the file she had printed from the archive, Rose Taylor's employee record, a name, a photo, a hire date, and then nothing, as if someone had made her disappear. The silence Emily carried wasn't just personal. It had been engineered, covered, hidden. Laura looked at the notes Julia had given her, the bruises, the malnourishment, the trauma. This wasn't just an abandoned child. This was the buried consequence of power, shame, and denial. And now, a hospital that prided itself on compassion stood at a crossroads. Laura picked up her phone and called Julia. "We can't wait for someone else to step in. If the system won't protect this girl, we will. Tomorrow morning I want CPS notified, and I want the hospital board to hear everything." She hung up and exhaled slowly. Outside the window, the city was settling into sleep. But inside Cedar Hill Memorial, one girl's truth had finally begun to wake up. Julia returned to the pediatric counseling room early the next morning, a warm blanket draped over her arm and a new set of crayons in hand. Emily sat curled up in the corner of the small couch, the ever-present teddy bear nestled under her chin, eyes watching the morning light spill through the narrow blinds. Julia approached gently and knelt beside her. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. Emily shrugged without answering. "Would you feel okay if we talked a little more today?" There was a pause. Then softly, "Okay." Julia sat beside her and pulled out her notebook. "I want to hear more. About the house you lived in with your mom and dad. Whatever you remember." Emily began slowly, almost as if reading from a secret storybook no one else was allowed to touch. She described a large white house with ivy along the stone walls, a backyard with dogs, and a room under the attic stairs where she and her mother lived. "Daddy used to come at night when the lady was asleep," she said. "He brought candy, told me stories, and said one day we'd have our own house." She paused. "Then one morning, Mommy cried and said we had to leave." Julia carefully documented every word, her heart growing heavier with each line Emily spoke. "Do you remember why your mom said you had to go?" she asked. Emily hugged her knees. "The lady came to our room," she whispered. "She screamed. She pulled Mommy's hair. Daddy wasn't home. Mommy said the lady saw my drawings on the wall and knew he was coming to see me." Julia frowned. "And what happened after that?" Emily's voice became faint, almost imperceptible. "She said if we didn't leave, something bad would happen. So we left." At that moment, Julia's phone vibrated. She excused herself gently and stepped into the hallway to take the call. It was Laura. "You're going to want to come to the archives," she said. "I found something in the old personnel files." When Julia arrived, Laura was sitting at a desk, a small box open in front of her. Inside was a folded letter in delicate, handwritten script. Julia read it slowly, her heart pounding with each word. "Rose, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you both. I promise when the time is right, I'll make it right. Don't give up. I won't." It was signed, Thomas. The letter felt like a ghost, rising from a grave no one had dared to acknowledge. It confirmed everything Emily had said, and more. Julia's hands trembled as she folded it back up and slid it into a protective file sleeve. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Not just for Emily, but for legal grounds. This is a written admission, a promise of intent, proof of knowledge." Laura nodded grimly, and just in time, too. "Meredith Blake arrived this morning with 2 attorneys and served the hospital with a formal cease and desist. She's demanding Emily be removed immediately, citing reputational damage and unauthorized contact with her husband." Julia's jaw clenched. "She's scared. This girl's existence threatens everything she's built her image on," Laura added. "And she's already filed a complaint to the hospital board. I've been called to a disciplinary review tomorrow. The pressure's mounting." Julia took a breath. "We need to get Child Protective Services and our legal team involved now. Because if Meredith wins this battle, it won't just be Emily who's silenced. It'll be every child who never got the chance to speak up." Laura agreed. "Then let's make sure her voice echoes louder than their lawyers ever will." That afternoon, the hospital's main lobby filled with a tense energy. The presence of Meredith Blake's legal entourage, sharp suits, briefcases clutched like weapons, did not go unnoticed by staff or visitors. Meredith herself stood like a storm in heels, giving clipped orders to her attorney, a man named Victor Lang, who immediately demanded to speak with the hospital administrator. Laura stood firm, her composure a shield. "This hospital has an obligation to ensure the well-being of every minor brought through our doors," she told them calmly. "Emily is under observation due to signs of neglect and potential abuse. Until her status is resolved by proper legal authorities, she remains under our protection." Victor sneered. "We're prepared to file an injunction within the hour. Mrs. Blake has influential partners on the hospital's board. You won't win this." Laura didn't flinch. "You'll do what you must, and we'll do what's right." As the confrontation unfolded, someone snapped a photo, Emily's teddy bear on the pediatric bed, with a nurse's hand gently placed over it. The image would later circulate online with the caption, "Who protects the voiceless when power demands silence?" It marked the beginning of something far bigger than a hospital dispute. By evening, the hospital board was flooded with emails, calls, and media inquiries. Someone, likely a staff member unwilling to stay quiet, had anonymously leaked the letter from Thomas Blake, along with a redacted summary of Emily's condition. A child with no voice, claiming a father too, powerful to acknowledge her. The public response was immediate and fierce. Local news stations ran headlines like "Hidden Daughter in Hospital Sparks Legal Storm" and "Secrets of Cedar Hill, What is Meredith Blake Hiding?" On social media, a hashtag began to trend, "Justice for Emily." Within hours, the hospital's PR department released a statement emphasizing patient privacy, but it was too late. The story had become national. Laura and Julia huddled in a back office trying to prepare for what came next. "They're going to push harder now," Julia said, exhausted. "And we'll push back," Laura replied. "We have something they don't. The truth." In the next room, Emily slept soundly for the first time in days, her arms wrapped around her bear. Outside her window, camera flashes blinked like stars trying to find their way through fog. Late that night, Laura wrote her personal statement to the hospital board. Every word was precise, unwavering. She detailed the timeline of Emily's arrival, the bruises, the malnourishment, the direct verbal threats made by Meredith, and the handwritten letter from Thomas. She closed the document with a line that would later be quoted by advocates across the country. "I didn't break hospital policy. I fulfilled the first duty of this profession, to protect the vulnerable, even when the powerful demand we look away." When she clicked send, the weight on her chest eased only slightly. She stepped out into the hallway and saw Julia standing, silently, looking at the child they had both grown fiercely protective of. "You know this isn't just about one little girl anymore," Julia said softly. Laura nodded. "No, it's about all the others like her, the ones who were told to stay quiet, to hide, to pretend they didn't exist. Not this time, this." And in that moment, beneath the glow of sterile hospital lights and surrounded by the hum of distant machines, a new truth took root, one that wouldn't stay buried again. The hospital was unusually tense the next morning. Conversations fell to whispers, and eyes lingered too long on closed office doors. Staff moved carefully, aware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. The photo, Emily's tiny form crouched in the ICU corridor, her face buried in her bear, tears staining the sterile tile, had gone viral overnight. It had been snapped by a visiting freelance journalist, Ethan Rowe, who had initially come to cover a separate healthcare feature. But the moment he passed the ICU wing and saw Emily, alone and trembling outside a sealed door, he paused. He captured the image, but when he later learned her story from an anonymous nurse, something shifted in him. By dawn, the article was live. "The Forgotten Child in the Corridor. What is Cedar Hill Memorial hiding?" Within hours, it was shared by advocacy groups, pediatric associations, and social justice influencers across the country. The headline hit harder than anyone anticipated, not because of Emily's claim to a man in a coma, but because the world recognized what they saw, a system that had chosen silence over compassion. Laura sat in her office, staring at the flood of emails pouring into her inbox, some supportive, many outraged. The hospital's legal team had already requested an emergency meeting. "Containment," they said. "We need to manage optics." But for Laura, this was no longer about optics. It never had been. It was about truth, a truth the hospital had been complicit in, hiding, whether by choice or pressure. And now, that truth had a face. "You're going to need to lawyer up," Julia warned, as she stepped into Laura's office holding a printed copy of the article. "They're going to make you the scapegoat. They'll say you breached confidentiality, released sensitive data, jeopardized the institution." Laura closed her laptop. "Let them try. They think protecting a child is a liability. Let them say it out loud." Julia paused, then handed over a second document. "3 former house employees from the Blake residence have contacted Ethan." They gave full statements. To his team, housekeeper, groundskeeper, and the cook, all confirmed they saw a child in the attic quarters. One of them, Maria Elkins, said she saw Thomas bring food upstairs regularly, late at night when Meredith was asleep. Outside the hospital's main entrance was swarmed with reporters. Microphones, cameras, protesters holding signs, "Protect Emily," "No child is a scandal," "Truth before power." Their voices a mixture of fury and hope. Inside, chaos reigned. The hospital board was split. One faction wanted immediate damage control, including Laura's suspension. Another, led by a handful of ethics committee members, insisted the hospital uphold its duty to the vulnerable, despite the blowback. During an emergency board session, Laura was summoned to speak. The room was filled with department heads, legal counsel, and board members, each more guarded than the next. "You've put this hospital at legal risk," one director said. "You allowed a minor to become the face of a media firestorm." Laura stood her ground. "I didn't choose for her to be abandoned. I didn't choose for her to be erased from the man's file, but I will choose to protect her. If that makes me a risk, so be it." Silence fell over the room. Even the hospital's administrator, a stern woman named Dr. Claudia Harris, looked momentarily shaken. "You understand this could end your career," she said. "Yes," Laura replied, "but I'd rather lose my job than my integrity." That night, Ethan published the second part of his exposé, Testimonies from the Shadows, Voices that Saw Emily. In it, he included quotes from the 3 staff members who had worked for the Blakes. Maria Elkins recounted seeing a little girl peeking from under the attic curtain. She was quiet, always holding a stuffed bear. Mr. Blake called her Sunshine when no one else was around. The groundskeeper, David Poole, added that he once saw Thomas hug the child in the back garden and tell her, "One day, everything will be yours." The cook, Mrs. Tabitha Green, recalled late-night meals delivered in silence, always carried by Mr. Blake himself. The article made one thing clear. Emily's existence was not rumor. It had been a secret long buried under power, influence, and fear. That fear now began to shift. As truth came forward, silence became guilt. Anonymous staff from Cedar Hill began leaving voicemails with legal teams and journalists, hinting that they too had seen things but were told to stay quiet or lose everything. The institution's facade was cracking, its foundation undermined by the truth it had tried to suppress. Meanwhile, Emily remained under strict protection in the pediatric wing. Laura ensured she was never left alone. Julia increased her daily counseling sessions, and Emily, now more trusting, spoke in greater detail. She drew pictures of the mansion, of her attic room, of the dogs that once played with her when no one was watching. One drawing showed a tall man holding her hand and giving her ice cream, a detail that would later be cross-referenced with a street vendor near Central Park, who confirmed seeing a suited man with a curly-haired girl he called "my secret angel." Every statement, every memory, every scribbled crayon sketch became another line in the case being built, not just legally, but in the court of public opinion. And still, the hospital hesitated. Legal pressure from the Blakes grew. Threats of lawsuits and injunctions loomed. Meredith, through her lawyer, released a statement claiming the child was delusional and manipulated by opportunists. But the world had already seen Emily's tears. The world had already heard her silence, and the world was beginning to choose a side. By the end of the week, the state's Department of Family and Child Services opened an official investigation. Laura was summoned once again, not as a defendant, but as a witness. She presented everything: the medical findings, the psychological evaluations, the original letter from Thomas, and the testimonies gathered since. When asked what motivated her, she answered without hesitation, "Because if I don't fight for her, then who will?" In the hallway outside the hearing room, Julia found her and handed over a folded note. It was from Emily. On the front, she had written, "Thank you, Nurse Laura," in crayon. Inside was a drawing, a smiling stick figure holding a child's hand beneath the words, "You see me." Laura stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She would carry it to every meeting that followed, every legal challenge, every fight. Because some truths couldn't be denied, not by wealth, not by reputation, and not by silence. And as Laura walked back into the hearing, she knew the truth now had a voice, and its name was Emily. The air in the hospital had changed. What was once an undertone of quiet bureaucracy had now become a constant murmur of tension and anticipation. The pediatric wing was under near constant watch, not only by hospital staff but also by curious journalists stationed outside. Laura, sleep-deprived but unwavering, received a call from Ethan Rowe at 6:42 a.m. "I have something," he said. "A neurologist at Stanford I contacted, Dr. Alex Forrester, has been studying cognitive stimulation in coma patients. He says voice familiarity, especially from close relatives, can sometimes activate dormant neural connections. It's not guaranteed, but in certain cases the brain responds." Laura's breath caught. Emily's voice? "Exactly. He thinks it's worth a try." That afternoon, in a small counseling room decorated with clouds and alphabet posters, Emily sat on a small plastic chair facing a recorder. "Just talk to him," Julia said softly, placing the device on the table. "Tell him what you'd say if he could hear you." Emily looked down, then into the lens of the recorder as if her father could see her through it. Her voice was tender, honest, uncoached. "Daddy, it's me, Emily. Mommy's not doing well, and I miss you. You said you'd find us one day. I'm still waiting." The recording was delivered directly to Dr. Gavin Shaw, the ICU neurologist overseeing Thomas Blake's case. He listened to it in silence, seated beside Laura and Dr. Elise Morera. "The EEG scans still show minimal activity," Gavin admitted, "but if there's even the smallest chance this could trigger recognition, we need to try." Hospital policy dictated that no unauthorized devices could be used inside ICU rooms. But now, with state investigators involved and Emily's legal status in limbo, the rules had begun to bend. That night, under strict supervision, the small voice recorder was placed on a chair beside Thomas's bed. Wires coiled from his body like vines, the ventilator clicking rhythmically as a machine breathed for him. The nurse on duty, a woman named Sherry, pressed play. Emily's words filled the room like a prayer echoing through a cathedral. "You used to hold my hand. You called me your sunshine. If you can hear me, please come back. Please." For nearly 4 minutes, there was only silence, the soft hum of machines. Then, barely perceptible, a flicker on the EEG, a heartbeat spike. "The nurse," gasped. Dr. Gavin leaned in. Thomas's eyelids fluttered, then opened. It was slow, like watching a flower struggle to bloom in frozen soil. Thomas's gaze was unfocused at first, his eyes darting as though searching for familiarity in the blinding white light. Dr. Gavin called his name gently. "Thomas, can you hear me?" A minute passed. Another. Then a raspy breath. His dry lips parted, and a single word escaped, hoarse and broken. "Emily." Laura, standing frozen near the door, blinked back tears. She hadn't allowed herself to hope. Not really. But now it was undeniable. The man everyone believed unreachable had spoken, and he hadn't asked for his wife. He hadn't asked where he was. He had asked for his daughter. Dr. Gavin turned to Laura, stunned. "Get legal on the line," he said, "and call Julia. We need Emily here, now." Within the hour, the hospital's chief legal counsel was briefed. The wheels that had dragged so slowly in the face of Meredith's influence were suddenly spinning fast. The patient had awakened and spoken. His statement, clear, recorded, witnessed, shifted the entire narrative. No longer was Emily just a maybe. She was real, acknowledged, and that single word, Emily, carried the weight of a signed confession. Thomas's personal attorney, Elliot Keene, arrived within 90 minutes, briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. "He wants to amend his legal declaration," Keene told the hospital administration after reviewing Gavin's notes. "Immediately." Inside a secured private room, Thomas, now able to whisper a few coherent sentences, repeated it 3 times for the record. "Emily Grace Taylor is my biological daughter." A court liaison and a hospital ethics board observer stood by as Keene drafted an emergency petition requesting legal recognition of Emily as Thomas's heir and next of kin. He wishes for Emily to be protected, with nurse Laura Mendez and social worker Julia Ramos to serve as temporary legal guardians, Keene added. The document was notarized on the spot and electronically submitted to family court. Outside the room, Laura watched the digital confirmation go through, her heart pounding. "It's done," Julia whispered beside her. "She's not a ghost anymore." But the victory came with shadows. Because while Emily was gaining her name back, Meredith was losing control, and she was not the kind of woman who let go quietly. Meredith arrived an hour later, flanked by 2 high-profile attorneys and a PR advisor, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She stormed through the hospital lobby like a queen returning to a palace that dared move on without her. "Where is he?" she demanded. Laura intercepted her at the ICU corridor. "He's under legal counsel," Laura replied, "and your visitation rights are suspended until further notice." Meredith laughed, a cold, clipped sound. "He's my husband." "Not anymore," said a new voice behind her. It was Celia Norton, the attorney, newly appointed by Thomas to manage his affairs. "You've been removed as legal representative. Mr. Blake has acknowledged Emily Grace Taylor as his daughter and appointed guardianship to 2 parties of his choosing." Meredith's expression twisted. "You think I'll go down without a fight?" Celia didn't flinch. "You already have." With reporters swarming outside, the moment was not lost on anyone. A mother rejected, a child reclaimed, and a man, silent for weeks, now changing everything with a single breath. Meredith turned on her heel, her heels clicking like the final chime of a funeral bell. In the pediatric room, Emily sat on a soft hospital bed, her hands fidgeting nervously with the edges of a coloring book. When Laura walked in, her eyes softened. "Can I see him now?" Emily asked. Laura crouched beside her and nodded. "Yes, sweetie. He asked for you." They moved slowly through the halls, Julia at their side, until they reached the ICU. There, surrounded by machines, sat Thomas Blake, awake, pale, but alive. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Sunshine," he murmured. Emily let go of Julia's hand and rushed to the side of the bed, laying her teddy bear next to him. "You came back," she whispered. Thomas lifted a shaking hand and brushed her curls back. "I never stopped loving you," he said. "I was just afraid." Laura and Julia turned away, tears stinging their eyes. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not court filings, not headlines, not threats. Only a father and his daughter, reunited by truth, healed by love, and witnessed by a world that was finally listening. The atmosphere in the hospital shifted again, but this time it was less tension and more resolution. Though far from over, the war was reaching its next battlefield, the legal system. After waking from his coma and reaffirming Emily as his biological daughter, Thomas wasted no time. Within 24 hours, he requested a private legal session with Celia Norton, now his newly appointed attorney, inside a secured recovery suite. He was still weak, but his clarity of thought was absolute. Surrounded by witnesses from the hospital's legal department and a court liaison, Thomas dictated the necessary amendments to his will. "I, Thomas Gabriel Blake," he began, his voice raspy but deliberate, "acknowledge Emily Grace Taylor as my biological daughter and legal heir." His estate, once designated entirely to his wife Meredith and various trusts, would now be split, half to Emily placed in a protected fund, and the remainder to be restructured under ethical oversight. "Laura Mendes and Julia Ramos," he added, "are to serve as her joint guardians in the event of my death or incapacitation." The words etched themselves into official record, but the emotions behind them, guilt, love, redemption, were carved far deeper. This wasn't just a legal document, it was atonement. Meanwhile, the storm brewing outside the hospital began to pour down consequences. Following a thorough review of evidence, including Emily's testimony, medical records, and newly surfaced video footage from a neighbor near the Blake estate, local prosecutors moved swiftly. Meredith Blake was formally charged with child endangerment, obstruction of care, and emotional abuse. The most damning element wasn't just Emily's bruises or her exile, but a recorded audio snippet from a former staff member's phone. In it, Meredith could be heard yelling, "Get that child out of my house! I told you, she's not staying here." The voice was unmistakably hers. Laura sat in silence with Julia as the news played across national broadcasts. A surreal montage of a woman once seen as untouchable now escorted from her penthouse by police. "Justice isn't fast," Julia murmured. "But sometimes it's precise." Laura nodded, but said nothing. She couldn't celebrate. Not yet. There was still one more piece to the story that remained unfinished, and it lay not in courtrooms or press conferences, but in a different hospital, critical care. Emily had asked to see her mother nearly every day since her father had awakened, and now, with legal protection in place, the time had finally come. Julia, holding her hand gently, walked her through the corridors to the room where Rose Taylor lay, intubated, pale, and nearly unrecognizable from the vibrant woman Emily remembered. Machines beeped steadily, an artificial heartbeat holding her between life and death. Emily hesitated at the door, her small fingers tightening around Julia's. "Will she wake up?" she asked. Julia's face was calm but honest. "We don't know, sweetheart, but she's still here, and she'll know you came." They entered slowly. Laura had arranged for privacy. No medical staff, no onlookers, just Emily and her mother. The little girl climbed onto the chair beside the bed and laid her bare gently beside Rose's arm. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered. "Daddy came back. He said he's sorry. He told them I'm really his." Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "I'm safe now, I promise. And Nurse Laura and Miss Julia are with me. You don't have to worry anymore." As she leaned in and kissed her mother's cheek, Rose's eyelids fluttered. Briefly, just enough to draw a shallow breath and release it in a slow, final sigh. Julia stepped forward, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. The monitor's tone shifted, a steady flat line, sharp but soft. No panic ensued, no doctors rushed in. The moment had been prepared for. Rose Taylor had waited, just long enough. Emily didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the bear, tucked it under her arm, and turned to Julia. "She heard me," she said softly. "I know she did." Julia knelt down, cupping the girl's face. "She was waiting for you, and now she knows you're okay." Outside the room, Laura stood with Dr. Elise Morera and Celia, watching through the glass, her eyes glistening. "We'll need to start arrangements," Celia said gently. Laura nodded. "She left behind more than a child. She left behind truth, and that's enough." That night, Emily slept in the pediatric wing, her bear clutched to her chest. Her world had shifted again, but this time the foundation was stronger. She had a name, a father who had chosen her, and the farewell every child deserves, the chance to say goodbye. The following morning, the family court approved the emergency guardianship and ratified the paternity amendment filed by Thomas. The news broke across national channels. Emily Grace Taylor, daughter of Thomas Blake, now legally recognized. Accompanying the report was a photo, Emily walking hand in hand with Laura and Julia across the hospital courtyard. For the public, it was a symbol of healing. For Laura, it was a call to action. In a quiet meeting with Julia, she expressed a vision that had taken root during those long nights of uncertainty. "I want to start something," she said. "A place for children like Emily, ones who fall between systems and stories, who need people to fight like hell just to be seen." Julia smiled, not surprised. "A sanctuary?" "Something like that," Laura replied. "Not just safety, dignity, recognition." They looked at Emily through the glass wall as she colored under the sunlight, her bear sitting beside her. She had survived more than most, could comprehend, and she hadn't broken. She had become proof that love could defy power, and truth could outlast silence. Later that day, Thomas, still recovering but stronger, requested a private meeting with Emily. He sat in a wheelchair, pale but upright, his hands folded nervously in his lap when she entered. He smiled weakly. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. Emily approached slowly and sat across from him. "You came back," she said. "That's enough." They talked for nearly an hour, about her drawings, her favorite ice cream, and the story her mother used to read to her every night. When their time ended, Emily rose and hugged him, wrapping her small arms around his chest. "We can start over," she said. "Just don't go away again." Thomas, voice trembling, promised, "Never again." For the first time since he'd awoken, his heart monitor spiked. Not from distress, but from something else entirely, life. The weeks that followed moved both fast and slow. Fast in the way the legal confirmations came in. Court seals, signatures, official guardianship notices, and slow in the weight of everything Laura had carried. With Emily now legally protected and Thomas on a steady road to recovery, Laura did something she had only dared to imagine in the quietest moments between emergencies. She submitted her resignation. The decision wasn't made out of defeat or fatigue. It was conviction. She had fought the system, and for once, the system had listened. But she knew the victory couldn't end there. "There are other Emilys," she told Julia over coffee one morning. "Other girls hiding behind curtains, drawing on attic walls, waiting for someone to see them." Julia didn't ask why. She just nodded. "Then we build something for them." Thomas offered his support before she could even ask. "Use my foundation," he said. "Let this story become more than a memory. Let it become shelter." And so the vision took form. Not a shelter in the traditional sense, but a sanctuary rooted in dignity and healing. They named it the Clara Light Hope Center, a place where no child's voice would be ignored again. The building wasn't glamorous. It stood on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by quiet trees and trimmed hedges. But inside, it felt alive. Each room was painted in soft pastels, filled with bookshelves, craft tables, cozy blankets, and laughter. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and fruit, and the hallways were decorated not with plaques or certificates, but with framed drawings made by the girls themselves. The center opened 6 months after Emily's recognition, supported by community donations, media attention, and a growing wave of public support sparked by her story. Nurses, therapists, retired teachers, and trauma counselors volunteered their time. There was a garden in the back, where the girls planted flowers in memory of people they'd loved or lost. And in the heart of it all stood Laura, no longer just Nurse Mendez, but founder, mentor, and protector. She moved, differently now, slower, more intentional. The weight on her shoulders had shifted, not vanished, but it was a burden she now shared with others who believed, like her, that healing begins with being seen. Emily was the center's first official resident, and quickly became its soft-spoken ambassador. She no longer clung to her bear for dear life, though she still carried it everywhere, now as a symbol of survival, not a shield. Her eyes had changed too, no longer darting from shadow to shadow, but focused, sometimes even defiant. She took on small tasks with pride, helping serve meals, setting up chairs for story time, comforting newcomers with that calm, quiet strength she had learned from Laura and Julia. One afternoon, a girl named Mia arrived. She was 8, thin and silent, with a plastic bag holding all her belongings. Emily met her at the entrance, holding 2 juice boxes. "Hi," she said simply. "Want to sit with me?" Mia didn't answer, but she followed. Inside, Emily led her to the art room and handed her a crayon. "Here, we draw first. Talking comes later." It was something Laura had once said to her, and now it was hers to pass on. That evening, as Mia slowly colored a picture of a house with a sun above it, Emily leaned in and whispered, "Here, no one is invisible." The community's response to the Hope Center exceeded all expectations. Letters poured in from strangers, some survivors themselves, others inspired by Emily's courage or Laura's defiance. Donations arrived with notes that read, "For the girls who still wait," or "Because every child deserves a voice." Local schools offered programs, libraries donated books, even nearby restaurants delivered meals once a week. It wasn't perfect. Some nights were still hard. Trauma didn't dissolve just because the address changed. But the center had rules written not on paper, but in principle. No one is turned away. No one is shamed. Everyone matters. One evening, Julia stood in the doorway watching Laura and the girls reading beneath soft lamps. "You didn't just build a building," she said. "You built a home for the forgotten." Laura didn't reply right away. She was watching Emily laugh, really laugh, as she told Mia a story involving a talking squirrel and a crooked tree. "They're not forgotten anymore," she finally said. "They're remembering themselves." Thomas, still recovering but stronger by the day, visited often. He never came with grand gestures, no cameras, no speeches, just quiet presence. Sometimes he helped tend the garden. Sometimes he sat on the porch with Emily, drawing in silence. He donated art supplies, books, and even a set of instruments for music therapy. But most importantly, he listened. He listened to the girls talk about their mothers, their fears, their dreams. He listened the way he once failed to. He had once believed his silence protected those he loved, but now he knew better. Silence had cost them everything. Now he used his voice to amplify theirs. In a quiet ceremony held beneath the garden archway, he unveiled a plaque that read, "In honor of every child who waited, and every adult who dared to see them." Emily stood beside him, holding his hand. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence said it all. And so it was that a child once cast out, once silenced, became the symbol of change. Emily had not asked for the fight, but she had survived it, and through her survival, others now had a path. On the first anniversary of the Hope Center's founding, Emily stood at the entrance, her bear tucked under one arm, and greeted a new girl, arriving with tear-stained cheeks and tired eyes. "Hi," she said. "I'm Emily." The girl didn't respond. "This place is special," Emily continued. "You don't have to be afraid here. You don't have to explain everything at once. We'll figure it out together." She smiled gently. "Here, no one is invisible." And with that, she opened the door wide. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Mr. Edward's Tales for more true stories that touch the heart. Leave a comment telling us what you thought, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter.